Good morning and God bless. David Akers, Target Individual here. Boy, I hope everybody's having a good day so far. They've been really burning me up the last few days, but it's all good. I found this Bible verse this morning, and it's pretty encouraging. And I'm going to do that, and I'm going to read a whole excerpt out of I printed off out of John Hall's book Guinea Pigs about remote neural monitoring. And I have many target individuals all around the world contacting me and saying stuff's happening to them. So if you're not a target individual and watching this, explain to me, and you say it's not real, explain to me how everybody all over the world is saying the same thing's happening. It's not a coincidence, okay? Anyway, the Bible verse I found is, for what glory is it if when you be buffeted for your faults, buffeted means beaten or punished, you shall take it patiently. But if when you do good and suffer for it, you take it patiently, this is acceptable with God. And what it's saying is, God sees our pain and we will be rewarded one day. And if you're not a believer and you say, well, God, I understand. I've been there where you're at, and I've been there. So I do not look down on you, and you are entitled to your beliefs, and I would not judge you one bit. I would sit down and eat with you like the next man. Anyway, I'm going to get started on this. And here's remote neural monitoring. It's a history of it, and it's just telling how John Hall is a very excellent author. He goes in very detailed. Thousands of people across the United States and across the whole globe have already been complaining of being victimized by remote neural monitoring. It remains to be seen if this has been a part of the experimental phase of this technology or if the technology has fallen into criminal hands. Many of the victims have been accused of being delusional. However, delusional disorder in the United States has a 0.3% incidence in the general population, and the numbers of similarities of complaints lends itself more to the likelihood of experimentation. Nonetheless, this is very intrusive technology, should prove difficult to pitch to the general public already fearful of any further loss of privacy. Maybe not. Many of the press releases are focusing on allowing the handicapped to use thought-controlled devices to make their lives easier. Furthermore, at the 2009 American International Toy Fair, 2 children's toys were on displays that harnessed the EEG to move a ball around using thought. Mattel's MindFlex and Uncle Milton's Force Trainer use wireless headsets that measure alpha and beta waves, which in turn trigger fans that move a foam ball up or down or sideways. The toys retail for $129 and $79 respectively. What could be more innocent and non-threatening than children's toys? Make no mistake, this is an intentional attempt at mainstreaming a form of technology that will have grave consequences on society. If you have any doubt, ask any of the victims of this research that have lost their careers and families after being diagnosed as delusional, only to see the technology they were told did not exist appears at Toys R Us. All right, I'm not done. The MKUltra research and remote viewing research alluded scientists not only to what effects they wanted, but what part of the brain to focus on to get those effects. While scientists disagreed with the ELF wave hypothesis, the majority of the research, both in the United States and Soviet Union, continued to focus on the effects of the ELF brain waves. However, one problem still remained. Many of the victims of MKUltra had been unwitting subjects who had been lied to and coerced into unethical experimentation. The technological limitations at the time had necessitated sequestering victims into hospitals where they could be drugged and subjected to electroconvulsive therapy using electrodes placed on the scalp. Psychophysiologic monitoring of the EEG and other vital signs also required sensors placed on the subject. In addition, things had become a little hot for the MKUltra researchers by the early 1970s. Victims' complaints had prompted congressional hearings with the unethical experimentations conducted by CIA on unwitting subjects began to be exposed. With Senator Ted Kennedy at the helm, CIA documents that survived the shredding machine painted a picture of bizarre, unethical experimentation, mostly done through front companies. Had the CIA not sequestered victims in research centers for experimentations and left the paper trail, there may have never been disclosure in congressional hearings. The public was outraged at the abuse. The Congress was dismayed. The CIA began looking for other ways to continue their mind control research with greater plausibility and deniability and less chance of getting caught with their pants down. The era of remote neural monitoring had begun. The Advanced Research Projects Agency awarded a contract for $338,000 to the Stanford Research Institute on February 1972, February 9th. The program director was George Lawrence, and the contract was granted to Dr. Lawrence Pinio to determine the feasibility of bio-cybernetic communication. More specifically, Dr. Peniel was researching the feasibility of designing a communication link between man and computer using electrical activity of the brain during verbal thinking. The hypothesis was that the electrical activity of the brain during thought may be similar to electrical activity of the brain during overt speech. The EEGs of the subjects were measured using scalp electrodes over the front temporal lobes. The research was predicted on the assumption that thought is nothing more than covert speech. Subjects were shown pictures of cards of the words they were to think about as their EEGs were recorded. The research concluded that the EEG reveals similar responses during the silent reading to that during overt speech, that these responses may be classified correctly by a computer with a high degree of accuracy. Peniel's study also focused on identifying the EEG patterns of homonyms. Homonyms are words like right and right, like W-R-I-T-E and R-I-G-H-T, which are pronounced the same but have different meanings. EEG patterns were similar when subjects thought single word right or right. However, if the subject thought of the word in context of a phrase, the EEG was capable of discriminating similarly articulated words. Electrodes were placed at various sites on the scalp. However, temporal lobe electrodes demonstrated the most statistically significant accuracy. To the contrary, electrodes placed over the occipital or parietal areas of the brain had no better chance than correlation. One must remember, Dr. Peniel's research was conducted in 1972 with relatively crude technology for measuring the EEG. Despite technological shortcomings, he was still able to construct an EEG dictionary of certain words that were only thought by subjects. Similar to the remote viewing studies, he determined the temporal lobes of the brain were the most valuable in measuring the EEG representation of thoughts. In addition, he observed parameters that would increase the accuracy of the EEG corresponding to the covertly thought word or phrase. These parameters included training the subject in the operating system and using temporal training for covert responses, giving the subject set responses to think about, and using words or phrases that are meaningful to the subject. Overall, Dr. Peniel's research in 1972 determined that a bio-cybernetic communication system was feasible, which would allow a computer to interpret human thought based on EEG. Not surprisingly, included in his references of studies are studies performed by Dr. W.R. Aday, a MKUltra subcontractor. And you got to remember, before I continue, 1972, they've been having this tech, and that's just the base of it. Just think about how advanced it is right now. They can control our thoughts, that's the invasion of privacy. Knowing what we're doing at all times, knowing what we're thinking, invasion of privacy. God made us as beings with free will. We're supposed to be able to make our own decisions and not, you know what I'm saying? He didn't make this for this technology to destroy people and monitor them and control thoughts and trigger actions and, burn them up in their head and, have people following them around. It's just crazy. I'm going to continue. The research that followed focused remotely on sensing the small electrical potentials generated by the brain. Remotely detecting the EEG would negate for the scalp electrodes and alleviate the requirement for an informal consent on the subjects. One researcher, Robert Malek, researched remote monitoring altering brainwaves, which culminated in the filing U.S. patent number 3951134 in 1974. His apparatus involved transmitting a base signal and first signal to the brain of a monitored subject. The brain of the subject would then transmit a second signal back to a receiver in response to the two incoming signals. Essentially, the two incoming signals would entrain with the brain's inherent electrical frequency, or interference waveform would be returned to a receiver. The interference waveform could then be demodulated and amplified and displayed visually before routed to a computer. According to Malek, the demodulated waveform would be used to produce a compensating signal which could be transmitted back to the brain. The compensated signal could be artificially attempted to entrain the normal brain activity and produce a desired change in the subject's brains. In Malik's description of the apparatus, he specifically mentions its value in monitoring a conscious subject without his awareness. His patent was published in 1976, and his apparatus was comprised of components commonly employed in radar systems at the same time. Coincidentally, another discovery relating to radar installations was the Frey effect, or microwave hearing, which will be covered later. And I do have that printed off, and it will be done tomorrow. And it's called auditory harassment, synthetic telepathy, V2K, I'm going to do, that's going to be my next video. All right, I'm going to continue. Malik's concluding paragraph from the published patent stated, persons in critical positions such as drivers and pilots can continuously be monitored with provisions for activation of an emergency device in the event of human failure. Seizures, sleepiness, and dreaming can be detected. Bodily functions such as pulse rate, heartbeat, regularity, and others can also be monitored. Occurrences of hallucinations can be detected. The system also permits medical diagnosis of patients inaccessible to physicians from remote stations. I mean, they're putting out, this, it's got some positive things, but the bad outweighs the good, folks. It's not worth it. It's better to go on. I mean, God didn't create us to have this technology and make this stuff, because the bad outweighs the good in this situation. Just think what they can do. They can control you. If they can do all this medical stations and remotely diagnose you and stuff, just think what else they can do to your body without you consenting. All right, I'm going to continue. It must be remembered Malik's apparatus was theorized in 1976 with vastly inferior technology compared to today. Advances in computational speed and monitoring technology have taken Dr. Pinio's EEG dictionary and Malik's remote EEG apparatus further than they had even dreamed. Using these basic concepts, more modern research is focused on converting the received electromagnetic waveforms back into audible thought that can be monitored and recorded. Essentially, mind reading has come of age and has been in use among some intelligence agencies for a number of years now. In addition to monitoring the subject's thoughts, researchers have also capitalized on Malik's earlier discovered EEG entrainment techniques. Once a dictionary of EEG waveforms corresponding to various emotional states were created, it became relatively easy to cause a normal subject's brain to entrain the desired waveform to produce a desired emotional state. That means they can produce fear, anxiety, panic remotely. One would assume that using the same technique, the visual and auditory cortexes of the brain could be entrained to stimulate visual and auditory hallucinations respectively. This would result in what subjects would perceive as realistic appearing holograms or sounds that cannot be attributed to a realistic source in their surroundings. Indeed, thousands of people across the United States and across the world are voicing complaints of just this phenomenon. While this may be sounding like a bit like science fiction at this point, if the reader places the current research into context with earlier MKUltra studies, the desired goal seems clear. The agencies behind the researchers were avidly looking for methods to hear thoughts in real time for the purpose of covert communication, lie detection, and behavior modification, not to be left out of the mind race. The various armed focuses have funded their own independent research into remote neural monitoring. The Army refers to technology of decoding thought into a real-time audible signal as synthetic telepathy. A team of University of California at Irvine researchers had been awarded a $4 million grant to research and develop a method for soldiers in the field to communicate telepathically. This will be accomplished through a brain-computer interface, BCI, in which one soldier's EEG will be remotely sensed and decoded. This transmitted to another brain as an audible signal of thought. Researchers admit that there will be a steep learning curve as soldiers train themselves to communicate with each other using thoughts alone and not spoken words. The grant money, your tax dollars, comes from the United States Department of Defense Multidisciplinary University Research Initiative Program. This program supports research involving more than one science and engineering discipline. At face value, the Army's admission of this undertaking appears innocent enough and could quite possibly have important national security implications. However, there's more alarming admission if one reads between the lines. The current research is focusing on interactive synthetic telepathy between multiple warfighters in the fields. It's the opinion of the author that this is an admission that the technology has already been perfected in a bidirectional manner between the targeted subject and communication system. This has been of particular relevance when one takes into consideration the increasing number of people complaining of hearing voices in their heads. Knowing the history of covert experimentation in this country, is it possible that the public has been used as unwitting guinea pigs in researching this technology? An argument can easily be made that this is the case. More current research into remote neural monitors has involved decoding the action potentials arising in speech cortex that sends signals to the muscles of speech. Everyone has heard of the old adage, don't speak without thinking. As it turns out, this is impossible. Thoughts are the precursors to speech, and this establishes the basis of a remote neural monitoring, synthetic telepathy, and thought-controlled devices. Many researchers have found on sensing the evoked potentials originating in the speech cortex and using the signal to control various devices by thought alone. In order to achieve this, one must elucidate the the biomechanics of speech and hearing as it pertains to electromagnetic potential generated in both the auditory and speech centers of the brain. Once again, the temporal lobes of the human brain had proven to be the area most involved in speech and hearing. In 1999, researchers at Albert Einstein College of Medicine published a paper in the Internal Journal of Neurophysiology in which they described recording field potentials directly from auditory complex. Their study was most interested in determining voice onset at the time. Voice onset time, VOT, the time interval between consonant onset and onset of vocal cord vibration, establishing the time delay between the brain signaling the vocal cords and the vocal cords actually responding to generate speech is important. It allows one to know when and for what duration the signal will be present to be remotely sensed and electromechanically converted to a form that will activate a device. Indeed, the research has paid off. We now have digital voice generators and robotic limbs that may be controlled by originated from the speech centers of the brain. While this technology may prove to be invaluable to the handicapped, decoding thought may have grave consequences on society as it is used in a more covert fashion. And we'll cover two things real quick. I'm not anti-military. I'm very patriotic for my country. I respect our troops that go to war and fight. I'm anti these people that are using this stuff for bad, whoever it is. So don't say, oh, he's anti-government. No, I support our troops. My grandpa retired from the Navy. I'm very patriotic when it comes to defending our country. But when it comes to using weapons illegally, whoever does that, I'm against it. And a message for the perps and stuff out here. You don't think y'all are being used up. And when y'all get used up and they get done with you, you're in the program next. Yeah. And that's my opinion. I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that they're not going to just let y'all do this and get away and get rewards and all of that. And then what happens when your job's up? You're expendable. You are collateral damage. You know too much. You're going to be targeted too eventually. And if we don't stop this AI movement, everybody in the world will be targeted and monitored 24/7. So thanks and God bless. And I don't know if I gave that scripture I said this morning, so I'm going to go ahead and give it real quick. 1 Peter 2:20 was a scripture because I'm pretty sure I read the scripture and didn't give the verse. God bless y'all. Y'all have a great day, and I will be doing a video on auditory harassment, synthetic telepathy tomorrow.